David Campbell's presentation from World Press Photo. I've messed it up. He's not going to talk about masculinity, but maybe he is. Supporting stories that matter, diversity, education, and solutions. David Campbell.
I'm going to do my best to not directly talk about masculinity. I suspect a trace of it is unavoidable. I want to say it's a real pleasure, personally and professionally, to be here. This is my second time at Chobi Mela. The first time I came was in 2011 as an individual, and it's a pleasure to be back here 8 years later, representing the organisation I now work for, the World Press Photo Foundation. It was very, very important for everyone at the foundation that we had another connection represented here, particularly at this time. Chobi Mela, you want me to hold that closer? Yes? Ah, okay. I failed in my moment of masculinity. What I was saying was that it's very important for everyone at the organisation that we're here and part of Chobi Mela. That's been important for some time, and it's particularly important given the issues of wanting to be more global and diverse as an organisation that I'm going to talk to you about for a few minutes. This will be a little bit of a change of pace compared to all the other presentations because I'm not presenting you with creative work. But what I'll try and do is just present you with some of the thinking that goes on in the organisation and how we're trying to address some of these questions of diversity and education, and in particular at the end encouraging new perspectives and new work, because we think we have a role to play in that. I was asked to speak about the Foundation's institutional roles in supporting socially engaged projects, so I hope that that theme will also come out a little bit through what I want to say. World Press Photo, you will know, has been most often defined by its contest. And that contest began in 1955, but it's a kind of a curious thing of the organisation itself, that is the World Press Photo Foundation, which runs the World Press Photo Contest and other things, is that the output of the contest is not decided by the organisation. It's decided by the juries, both in the photo contest and the digital storytelling contest, that we appoint. So obviously we have influence in terms of who's chosen as jurors and so on, but once they get in the room, it is they, not staff members of the organisation, that get to decide on the actual nominees and winners themselves. We're in the back of the room sometimes, we're not allowed to comment, we're not allowed to vote, we're not allowed to participate. Though sometimes we're there silently cheering or sometimes biting our nails thinking, no, don't vote for that one. And then we work with those photos throughout the year when the decision has finally been made and they become part of the yearbook and part of the exhibition that we take around. That means we are also trying to find, and we're also trying to increase the number of programs and activities that we as a foundation have more direct role in it, if you like, a little bit more control over it in terms of the content, because that enables us to really pursue these issues of being more global and more diverse in a more active way. It's important to remember too, the foundation is a private Dutch organisation. It's always done more than the annual photo contest, but that's what we've been defined as. And we're really emphasising the importance of collaborating with others so that we can recognise and support talent in visual journalism and storytelling worldwide. So that's part of the pleasure of being here. We see the foundation itself as a platform for connecting the world to the stories that matter, which is the phrase we now use to describe our purpose. And we do that across our website, our social media channels, our online magazine Witness, which gives us an audience, leaving aside even the exhibition, of many millions around the world. And one of the important things about that phrase, of course, is that we recognise the work we are giving attention to and so on as the stories that matter. What you'll notice about that is it doesn't talk about photography as such. And that's part of a new emphasis to look at the importance of context, to look at the backstory to particular things, and in terms of the idea of those that matter, to think about the visual stories that can have an impact, either on individual lives or collective lives. So we use that phrase because while the name of the organisation is World and Press and Photo, 3 words you probably wouldn't use now if you were starting an organisation. You'd probably have to call it something like Global and Media and Image. But we bequeath this from 55 and there's no point changing it. But we use the idea of the stories that matter because this includes both photography and digital storytelling, and it really focuses on the purpose, the function, the impact of work, as well as the questioning of that work. And we're looking to really ask those questions in particular fora and on particular platforms. Since 1955, there have been nearly 3,000 exhibitions worldwide that the Foundation has put on, and exhibitions are always conducted with local partners. We have a team in Amsterdam that curates and designs the original exhibition. There are then about 16 copies of a panel version and a number of copies of a framed version that then circulate throughout the world, maybe 8 or 10 on display at any one time, to places where we find local partners who want to host them. And they can be from museums and sometimes galleries, but all the way to shopping centres, or in Germany, railway stations, or as most recently in a public park in Yangon in Myanmar. So there are numerous venues, numerous ways of showing, and therefore it reaches an audience of some 4 million or more every year. Last year it went to 110 cities. We've also, if you can see the white dots on that map, has more than 130 education and outreach programs since 1990, since the first workshop in 1990. You can see on the one hand that it's global, and that it's been touched a lot of places in the world, and you can see on the other hand that there's a concentration on Europe in terms particularly of exhibitions, and a number that have been displayed there since 1955. So in trying to be more global, in trying to be more diverse, one thing that we're doing is also trying to run programs that are not just contests. And so last year we launched the 6x6 Global Talent Program, which relies on nomination and selection and promotion in 6 global regions to surface talent that we know is there, everyone knows is there. It's so evident when you come to Chobi Mela and other festivals, but to find a way to elevate particular people and particular stories, and then identify them, support them, and then through this connect them to others in their region, others around the world, so they can make use of our platforms and our channels and so on. And it's important to us that this is not a contest as such, even though it involves a process of selection, because we don't think everything should come with an award or whatever, even though that's kind of our historical legacy. In the most recent Asia edition, of course, you'll recognise some familiar names. And you will have worked out that behind the name 6x6 is that there are 6 people from one of the 6 global regions on a rotating basis. And in 18 months, we've done 6 global regions. And this is one of the kind of things that has happened in the last 2 years that is really now informing a lot of our programs. It's how we're trying to tackle the question of diversity and make diversity something. First of all, diversity itself is a natural condition in the sense that we are a diverse world. So when there is a lack of diversity, it's because certain things have been suppressed or ignored or excluded or marginalized. And what you have to do is try and make an effort to ensure that that doesn't happen so much. And for an organization, what you need are some principles that you can apply in all cases in your programs. There's no perfect formula to give you an accurate system of global representation for the huge diversity that exists within places, regions, countries, continents, and so on. But we settled on this as something that could work for us as a principle inside the organization, given that we're often dealing with who to put on selection committees, who to put on juries, who to select as masterclass participants, etc. And these are small groups of 6 or 12 or whatever, and you're trying to make that group as diverse as possible. So we thought, given the idea of 6x6 with 6 talents from 6 global regions, what if we use the structure of the global regions and then have that inform our other operations and inform our other programs. So we started out thinking about 6 continents, and as an Australian, I thought that's fantastic, because Australia will be a continent by itself and constantly promoted. But that's not a very diverse position to do that, given the population of that region. So there was like, we needed a division of the world that's going to put Australia into Southeast Asia, which of course it claims it wants to do on many occasions, and then structure other regions, etc. This division is based on kind of some well-known divisions, but you could divide the world up in all sorts of different ways. And even when you've divided the world up like this, you are still dealing with the fact that you're trying to represent huge amounts of diversity within these vast global regions. But it at least gives us a principle to think about how we structure certain things. So for example, this year for the first time, the photo jury involves specialized juries, and then they come together in a general jury that makes the final nominations and decisions. There is a chair and 6 members of the general jury, so we decided that there has to be one person from each of these global regions on the general jury plus a chair, and that's going to be the case from here on, so that you have as wide a range of views as possible. This year we've also restructured kind of the nomination system for the Goethe-Institut Masterclass. There's the selection system and so on. First thing is that we had a list of 165 or so nominators for the masterclass, and when we looked at it, it turned 105 Europeans on the list. Now, in fairness, as one of them pointed out to me recently, they were nominating from around the world, but we wanted to really build in this sense of global diversity in a more concrete way. So we said, well, okay, 6 global regions, let's try and get 20 to 35 in the first year, 20 to 35 nominators per region, and structure the international panel that way. Which meant I had to cut 70 Europeans out of it, which means I've not made a lot of friends in Europe in the last few weeks. The email inboxes contain some interesting messages in response to that. But if you're going to try and institute a particular principle of diversity, you're going to have to make these hard choices at certain times. And if we can grow the number of nominators in each region, then we can have more Europeans back, because there will still be parity for that. So we restructured the nominators on that. Selection committee, again, will be 6 people, 1 from each region. And we want to make sure that the participants, there were 12 participants in the masterclass, will be 2 from each region. And we will try and do that every year, so that each masterclass has a global overview. So we're making some choices on that. I do have a couple of photos. One which contains Bob Pledge. Can you see yourself, Bob?
Robert, I can see Robert. Last one.
Bottom right. This is the first Goethe-Institut Masterclass in 1994. Fred Richards also in there.
Yeah, with the white shirt.
With the white shirt, yes.
And the brothers. He was the brothers. Now go be. Giovanna Calvesi, David Burnley, Christian Peugeot,
Christian Peugeot on the front, David Burnley. And all the participants, the first photographer participants of this masterclass were all from Europe and the US. And this masterclass was actually held in Rotterdam, not Amsterdam, we found out later. But this, obviously the Goethe-Institut Masterclass is one of the important educational programs that we've been running for 25 years. But we have extended the masterclass model when funding has been available. So we have done a masterclass in Nairobi. This was what we called Masterclass West Africa, in Accra in Ghana last year. One in Mexico City in 2015, and we're looking to do more if local partners, and we want to work with local partners in all these places, existing organizations and so on, if they think that this masterclass model is of particular value. And that we're also rethinking, in terms of education, some important points. I don't know if anyone's read actually a very good anthropologist's book, Zeynep Gesell's book, The Image Brokers. Anyone read that? Highly recommend that, because it's actually an ethnography of photojournalism, and it looks at a number of organizations, news agencies, etc., etc. And there's a chapter on World Press Photo in it, where she did field work in the early 2000s, and it's fascinating to go back and read that and think about the organization. But For World Press Photo in the early 2000s, and I think for many organizations in Europe and North America at that time, education was seen as a development program. It was seen as something that you would try and train individuals around the world to do photography. And it was based on a terrible conceit, and based on ignorance actually, about the talent that existed in certain locations and certain places. And what we have to do is move away entirely from the notion of education as development and think about it as a way to collaborate with local partners, connect, and build on the talent that is clearly there, the skills that are clearly there, and so on. So perhaps the masterclass model still works for that in terms of the need for skills that I think is a need for skills anywhere in the world. I would say this to a European and a North American audience, that there are particular things related to visual storytelling that everyone could develop, but we certainly cannot proceed on the basis of the idea that somehow education is related, is a development program for organizations like ours. It has to be a collaborative and connected sort of program. That means, in particular, kind of mentorship opportunities, I think, for that. What I want to conclude with is talk about what I think is an important perspective that we might consider for developing visual journalism and storytelling. And it's what I, drawing on some other things taking place in journalism, wrote about as a solutions focus. Now, a solutions focus in visual journalism, and this is an article that I did in our Witness, our online magazine. A solutions focus in visual journalism wants to reset the journalistic narrative for some stories. And before I say what it is, it's very important to say what it's not. A solutions focus is not photographers or visual journalists coming up with solutions. A solutions focus is not about just positive, good, happy news as opposed to negative stories. And a solutions focus is not suggesting this is the only way that one should tell stories or investigate situations. It's meant to be an addition to existing approaches, new approaches that we haven't even thought of, and so on. But I think it is something that is part of a movement where a lot of North American journalists in particular are thinking about the problems with the media in that space and how there can be more engaging and stories that connect with audiences on some large, difficult issues. Sometimes you can't escape the professorial mode and putting a bit of text up on a PowerPoint type slide, but it does give you a little more detail on this. Solutions journalism changes the frame of the story to address what people talk about as the negativity bias in media. That is, the focus on disasters, the focus on wars, conflicts, and problems, which needs to go on, as we've just heard, particularly in South Asia at the moment. You must be telling stories about those things. But the problem is when you only tell stories about those things, and when the media doesn't contain other stories. So rather than focusing exclusively on problems, what visual journalism or journalism-based or trying to deliver a solutions focus does is look for cases where there are individuals or communities who are already taking action in response to problems. So again, as I stressed, it's not up to the photographer or the visual storyteller to come up with a solution. It's up to them to find individuals or communities, local communities, who are already addressing issues and problems in interesting ways and tell their story. And if you do that, then you're not only changing the frame from starting with the problem and then thinking about a solution, you're automatically giving local actors greater agency. You're already building on the knowledge of people in local situations. And you're showing that they're active and they have capacity, they're not passive, they're not just victims, and they have some pretty good ideas. Or they may have ideas that they try and don't work. This is meant to be an approach that is still critical and investigative. It's meant to probe and so on, which is why it's not just positive and happy stories in the opposition to negative and difficult stories. So it's an approach that puts problem solving at the center of the narrative. It really appreciates what the frame of journalism is, what the frame of visual journalism is, what the narrative is. It's going to look at evidence of the solution being implemented to address a particular problem. It's going to draw on the voices of people on the ground, at least as much as those who are writing policy papers or suggesting this from afar. And it has to recognize there's no single solution to social problems. There's always going to be a range of them. Every solution is going to have its limitations, and they're going to fail as well as they're going to succeed. So it is, though, I think, if you explore this, and we're going to start a program to explore this in a little bit more depth, it is a way of tackling that really difficult questions when people say, for example, you know, we are at the crunch point, which we are, in relationship to climate change. But it seems like such a massive issue. It seems like something that is almost hopeless, and how do we think about what might be done? If we turn this around and think, well, where are the individuals or communities who have adaptive strategies or have things that they're doing in their local community to already respond to the symptoms of climate change? How can we focus on those and then still discuss the problem once you've done that and look at other options, but do it in a way that's going to engage people without having to have a photograph of a polar bear, you know, on a glacier or something like that, or some sort of stereotype of a cracked desert, something like that. So it's something that can reset the framework, I think. It can add something important to the critical and investigative journalism toolkit. And it's something that we as an organisation would really like to research some more, develop some more, and see if local partners and organisations like Pathshala, like Drik and so on, would like to explore this, train on this particular thing, see if we can develop some stories that have this perspective. Because as yet, I don't think that in visual journalism, there's any work that would be consistent with this sort of approach as outlined. So I think we have the opportunity actually to do something really groundbreaking. Within textual journalism and online journalism, there are people who are writing what they think are solutions-based stories. When they do research, they find that the audience engages with them, stays on the story longer, comes away feeling better after reading the news, gets to young people and attracts them in particular ways. Let's see if that bears out. But in visual journalism, we don't have this body of work yet. We haven't even started this body of work. So we're looking to do that. So we're starting a program called the Solutions Visual Journalism Initiative. We're going to launch it later this year. We've got a partner, we're looking for some funding. So we're going to do educational outreach on what this perspective involves and means. We're going to be able to commission new work, small amount, and we're going to be able to publish online with some global media partners, one of which we've got signed up and others, as well as on our own platforms, as well as on the platforms of local partners. So I think it's a really exciting possibility, and I'm really looking forward to, you know, in the weeks and months ahead, talking with you some more about how we can do this together in this region and elsewhere. But I think we have the opportunity of creating new work, and that will make us at the Foundation very happy, because we'll not just be showing work that's been done to the world, we'll actually be creating some new work that I think answers a very important thing about the nature of our times and the issues that we have to tackle. Thank you very much. And happy to answer any questions.
Hi David, thank you. That was very interesting to see all the changes that have been implemented. Earlier this morning, when we were in that session with Alan, we were talking about the culture of contests.
Yes.
And how detrimental that has been to the community with regards to the idea of a star photographer, and how that's caused a certain sense of competition and desire to become part of that network. And I was wondering whether World Press Photo has ever thought about rethinking the concept of the contest altogether, because as you said in the beginning, what we're best known for is the contest, but given how much there is to do within the space of visual journalism now, have they ever considered stepping away from the contest altogether, or doing something radical enough to kind of really challenge this whole culture of contests?
Yeah, it's a good, challenging question, and logically you could say that would have to happen, and in many ways, you know, the weight of 60 or more years of contests, you know, weighs heavily on the perception of the organisation. I mean, that is something that, it's a private Dutch foundation. If the supervisory board, you wish to do that, it would have the capacity to do that. I mean, practically, of course, it's a very difficult thing in terms of if you're an organisation, even if you want to free yourself a little bit about those things, to dispense with all your heritage and then move on to something new is a major organisational challenge. Obviously, what we try and do, in the absence of that sort of total decision, is to think about how we can soften the edges on some of those things, to be honest. One of them is we did introduce this system where we have nominations and then we announce the actual winners in April. Now, on the one hand, and we did that because there's quite a lot of interest in broadcasting either online or broadcast of the actual ceremony itself. And the people who put the proposal to us were like, well, then we can do documentaries in the run-up to this about the stories and so on. So if that were to come off, it would give us 9 weeks between the first decision and the second to actually do more about the backstory, and that's why the stories that matter is something. That would be leveraging the opportunity, which is still awarding an individual, into both the resources and the kind of story for the backstory, so that's part of that. The second thing we try to do is that we have 3 nominees in each category. They don't know who's first, second, and third at the moment, and they don't know who wins the overall prizes. It used to be a system where we gave a little bit of cash prize to the person who ended up first, and we scrapped that, and we said we will give airfares and hotels to everyone who's nominated to come to the festival that takes place in Amsterdam. So to try actually to create a moment of community for that. So instead of just sending some cash to the first place person, it's like everyone gets the air ticket, gets to come to Amsterdam, gets to participate in kind of a mini version of the Chobi Mela for that. So those are the things in the absence of the total decision, where it's trying to soften those edges. The one thing I would say, and it doesn't focus on the contest as awarding star photographer or giving someone a prize, and it was the thing that, I mean, I've been working full-time in the organisation since the beginning of 2016. It was the one thing I learnt after I arrived and was kind of happily surprising to me. When the exhibition tours, you know, it gets a large audience. And when we did, either anecdotally going to the exhibition ourselves, watching the public, watching the pictures and so on, and then last year we did some more sustained audience research, most of the public who see the exhibition have never seen those photos before. And while we inside the industry think everyone's flooded with images and they've seen all this stuff, and you know, even if it's traditional news images, turns out they haven't. And it's a great, that means the exhibition is a great opportunity to reach the public with those stories. Now, I don't think, you know, they're interested in the one picture, you know, that becomes photo of the story, and then they'll be like, well, why that one versus that one? And if it's an opportunity for that discussion and debate, which we actively try to make it, then, you know, we can do that. So I think that, and that was a very pleasant surprise to me, because it was kind of like, actually and that's why the phrase connecting the world to the stories that matter was the one that we picked on, because actually one of the major concerns was actually the general public and the general audience. And so even though it's a contest, what it does is generate stories for them to pay attention to.
Thank you, David. I mean, it's a very interesting concept that you've placed over here, perhaps to try to probably think aloud about how you're going to go about it. For example, I mean, if the journalism is reporting a war in Syria, I mean, are you going to say that there should be a solution to that or something? I mean, we often know that the solution to that is for the bloody West to get out of that place. And I mean, what are the criteria that would say that, you know, this is the best solution? Visual journalism is going to be quality of the image, because that's often what is led in WordPress photo. Is it the quality of the journalism? Is it the quality of the solution itself that is going to be presented over there? So I mean, it opens up a whole host of questions, and I suppose that's something you might be thinking about.
Well, a lot of it is new territory. That while there's an organisation called the Solutions Journalism Network in North America. Tina Rosenberg of the New York Times is one of the co-founders of that. She's going to come to our festival in April to talk about that. So there's a lot of work to be done on how you think through some of these things. But I think through, having written that article and done some of this, I think about this kind of in less grand scale terms than the war in Syria and the solution to that. More to how would some communities be dealing with, refugee flows caused by conflict. So it's not necessarily a solution at UNHCR level, but it might be how these local communities are responding and adapting themselves to that sort of thing. But the number one thing is, to reiterate, it's not like the photographer has to search for the solution. What the photographer has to find, or the visual storyteller has to find, is the community that is already engaged in the solution. And as I said, there's no single solution to major social issues, which we have multiple different strategies, solution strategies, and so on. So yeah, lots to think through, but if we do it at that level of really focusing fundamentally on what are individuals or communities doing now, then we're actually telling a more complete story. And that's Tina's point, another person's point, is that we have focused on telling the story of problems, which is very important, but we have not yet really focused on telling the story of people who are already engaged, here and now, today, everywhere, in solutions.
Thanks, David. I've been involved with WordPress for a long time, and I've seen the shifts that have taken place. There was certainly the shift in masterclass in terms of what they used to have, and the shift in the jury, and shift in the winners over a period of time. One area where there hasn't been much shift is the board of WordPress. It used to be white Dutch men, and it hasn't shifted very much from that. So if really you're talking about gender issues, you're talking about diversity and all those sort of things, does WordPress walk the walk?
Two things about that. One is, as a private Dutch foundation, when you look at this, curious actually, I looked at the Articles of Association and you think, we as staff get appointed by the managing director. The managing director is appointed by the board. So that's the only link into the organisation. And then it's like, who appoints the board? Well, the board appoints the board. It regenerates itself. It does that. And I think actually this is probably the way for a lot of foundations, the way that operates. What I would draw a distinction between is the supervisory board, which actually its role is to oversee the financial performance of the foundation, the security of the foundation. And there was once an advisory board that was supposed to connect to the world, and that still had the characteristics that you say. That's now been scrapped, and we're in the process of putting together an international circle of advisors. And we're going to use the same global region structure to think about 2, 3, however many people from those regions, so that we have a group that we can always call on, who can actually give unsolicited advice at any time to us about problems or issues, or that we can call on if there are issues. So we're taking small steps on the path to walking the walk on that one.
David, thank you. That was very illuminating. Would it be fair to infer from what you say that you're really changing the role of the WordPress Fair to a news agency? And if you are, then how does that have a bearing on your choice of photography, photographs when it comes to the competition? And I think more interestingly, do you see this as contributing towards the worldwide problem of what's going to happen to the media in the future, and the new media that we're going to need if we're going to disseminate the stories that you are quite rightly facing such importance?
I wouldn't describe it as a shift to a news agency in the sense of it's never going to be an organisation that covers spot news, general news, immediate news like that. We definitely think about it as the shift to being, if you like, a media organisation or a media company or a media platform. No question about that. And we think about that both in terms of how we share the work that comes through the contests or 6x6 or the masterclass on all those channels and networks. I mean, when I arrived, Instagram, and this is not saying I did it, people on the team did it, you know, they had barely started to use Instagram, and now with sharing quality work, we have, you know, nearly just over 1.1 million followers, and, you know, grows at about 30,000 a month. You know, the appetite in the world for good quality work is really substantial. So we do see ourselves being a media organisation in that sense, and then through things like this, where we can get money from other parties and we can put it into initiatives like this, we can then return to the industry by saying, industry, I don't like that word, profession, whoever who's making, you know, high quality stories that fit this criteria, you know, these will end up being commissions that go to a few, you know, we don't have a huge pot of money, but a few people a year will be getting a commission to produce stories like this. So we're constantly looking for something where we can leverage money from someone else back into people who are making visuals or stories in that sense. So yeah, media organisation in terms of sharing and in terms of very small scale production like this, but never a vast news agency.
Thank you. I'm very glad that you mentioned the word money. Because I think what we're missing here is photographers never get paid. And this solutions, visual journalism initiative is extremely interesting. But I think you should also add another point there, how to solve the visual journalism big problem, which is photographers don't get money. And I was wondering if, as WordPress Photo, you have any wondering about how to get works for photographers in the region without being them just fixers of photographers from the West, because most of the people here actually get just those kind of works, like they are fixers. And since you are looking for them, photographers, to look for solutions in communities, they must be the ones who are actually in contact with the communities because they are from the community. So how do you step that further?
So, well, two things. One, you've outlined exactly the key point about this, is that you're looking for people to engage with those communities. Those people, if they're commissioned, will get paid, you know, a reasonable amount for that. That's why it's only going to be a small number in the first year. If you want us to think about a solution for the whole of the visual journalism industry,
Just a starting point.
just a starting point. Well, in a way, this is a small example of the starting point, because I think we have two paradoxes. So before I worked full-time in the organisation, I did one report for them called the Multimedia Research Project, and it looked basically at the state of journalism and how things had declined and why they had declined and so on. And it's not the internet's fault that actually journalism has declined, it's the collapse of advertising as a business model, which later the internet then fed into. But advertising was collapsing long before online news was a significant thing. And one of the conclusions, which is just also really important to reset this discussion, if you like, is that nobody in the world ever paid directly for journalism at any stage. Advertisers paid indirectly for journalism. If you paid a subscription fee for a magazine or a newspaper, you were making a tiny little contribution that never covered the costs. It was a gesture. But we were in a situation where there were editorial budgets because advertisers were basically subsidizing them indirectly. They didn't necessarily want to, and that was because newspapers and television stations were the gatekeepers. And now they're no longer the gatekeepers. There's more money than ever in media. None of it is in the editorial space. It's gone with digital advertising to the major American corporations, the Googles, the Facebooks, and so on. It's gone to private companies, it's gone to some foundations and so on. There's no single solution to this, but if you remember that no one paid directly, it means the solution that we have to follow now is you have to find indirect sources again. They won't be the same as advertising, but you have to leverage other sources of money, and you have to find people who want to pay for that dreaded word content. And then you have to be able to take from that payment, and it might be a commercial job that someone has to do for a period of time so that they earn enough money so they can then go and do their personal project, which also has been one of the fundamental features of photography for a very long time. The Eugene Smiths of the world freelance for a very long time. And they did these commercial things and then did their own projects, and they rarely got paid directly for the things that they loved most. So I don't have the solution, but I want to reset the terms of the conversation so we don't look in the wrong place for a solution. Because if we are looking for a return of editorially rich media organizations that are going to provide commissions, it ain't going to happen, and people are going to be way more frustrated than now. You have to leverage other sources indirectly.
Just as a journalist, I'm finding the idea of predetermined solutions, visual journalism initiative, a little bit troubling, because it seems to already tell you what you have to go out and find. And I think the basic principle of journalism is you go out and you find something and you try to make the best of it. I mean, journalism has huge problems, obviously, and in terms of representation and the range of issues it covers. But predetermining it almost makes it seem as if there is another category called problems visual journalism, which is there, and that would be setting this up in opposition. And I wonder whether, even if, I mean, there have been feature stories which media has run for a long time, which present the solution, so to speak. And problems, I mean, I would also challenge the idea about the negativity, because a lot of it is criticality, not negativity, that the media has. And what you are proposing is very individualized solutions to things which are intrinsic, sometimes policy-related, ideologically related problems. And then we have these small solutions. And last of all, if you have to do this, I'm wondering whether instead of awarding people and then telling them to go out and find solutions, look for stories which you think are there in the public domain and meet your criterion, and then reward them, rather than awarding someone to go and find the solution.
I think I reject most of your characterizations that you've made in that question, so I'll try and unpick them as we go along. First of all, we're not awarding them. What we want to do is explain what we think this perspective involves, and if someone wants to come forward, through a system we'll outline, wants to come forward with a proposal that they've got a story on this that fits the broad criteria of starting with the solution, then a commission could result from that, depending on the funds available. So this is not a contest, this is not awarding someone and so on. Yes, it's granting a commission that involves a process of selection. I disagree with the idea that the media, it's always difficult with generalizations about the media, but I disagree with the idea that the media is principally critical and not negative on that. I think that the criticality of media is, certainly if I look in Europe and North America, in short supply, and I think it needs to be encouraged and fostered. This is about critical investigative journalism, but with a different frame to start with. And I do think that the majority of media, particularly that I see on a daily basis, will focus on the problem first and never gets to a solution or never gets to what people are already doing. I just want to keep re-emphasizing that point. It's not about the photographer finding a solution, it's not about the visual storyteller finding a solution. It's about them recognizing where people are already engaged in exploring solutions to particular issues. And I don't think that is covered anywhere near to the extent that you imply in feature stories and so on. So I'm going to reject like the 4 premises of that. But because I think this hasn't been done, because I don't think there are visual stories within this framework, let's see how it goes. Maybe we're wrong about that, but I think it's worth an effort.
I think we're running out of time, sorry. Let's save it for later. What, do you have another question?
I do, that's why I'm holding the microphone. I'll keep it short.
Short but then, yeah, please.
Okay. Thanks, David, for the presentation. Thanks as well to the colleague who provided the first presentation. I thought it was excellent. Sorry you're not getting more questions, so that visually is very powerful. Look, I think this is a good idea. I've spent a few decades working in the UN system with refugees, and it's all negative. And there are solutions, and there's individual stories, and there's community stories, and there's big picture stories. My question is a little bit about the political economy of how are you going to sell this with the big news agencies. You dropped that there's at least somebody from the New York Times who's engaged. Negative news, I'll say negative, critical news, however you want to do it, ugly images sells, and controversial stories sell, and solutions generally, and softer media imagery doesn't. And so, pretty straight on question. I mean, what is the strategy to engage the New York Times and the other big media in the global north and the global south, which is important, to adopt, I'd say, a very positive approach. I think we'd all feel better reading the news if we could see more genuine solutions and not contrived and not constructed. And they are out there. Anyway, what's your thinking on that? Thanks.
So I have to be very brief. So three points. We have global media partners who are interested. And they're interested because they know there is an audience for this. I would be careful to strike the word positive and softer from your answer and question in that sense. There's no reason why these images should be softer. They could be just as difficult, even if it's a story about solutions. The images could still be difficult in that sense. And the third is that if you look at audience research, because the BBC has a unit of developing stories on this sense, there is higher engagement, higher time on page, basically better response to audience. It's not like black and white this, but X% more of people wanting to engage these things and wanting to see these perspectives, in addition to everything else. Again, it's not a replacement for everything, it's just part of the picture we don't see now.
I think we have
Yep.
to. Thank you very much.